It made me so happy to start this session already in meditation. And then at 9 o'clock, when the session started, I opened my eyes and I saw all the people with their video on already in meditation. And I had originally thought, oh, I'm going to have to say something about how we need to go into, or I'd like to invite everyone into meditation to start the session. And then I was so filled with joy that I didn't need to say it. So thank you. That was a really sweet moment, everybody. And it also made me think of I have a couple people who I have like semi-monthly Dhamma calls with, and this instruction doesn't arise very often in the conversation. But once in a while, the instruction arises that, hey, you don't need my help in this situation, or you don't need my help. You just know how to proceed without me. You have the wisdom, so trust it. And whenever that instruction does arise, it is so joyous to give it. So it just made me think of that. And then that also made me think of when I was a kid and my dad was teaching me how to ride a bike. And he would hold the back of the bike, and run after me while I started to understand in my body how to keep my balance and how to turn. And then one day I just looked back behind me and my dad was not there anymore. And he was standing off in the distance waving. And it was such a joy filled moment for me to be free and to have independence. And also, I imagine quite a joyous occasion for him that he did not have to run behind me holding my bike anymore. So I'm filled with joy this morning, and it seems like a perfect occasion to talk more about joy. Joy as the practice, joy as the point, joy as the destination and the journey and the sweetness that unfolds the more and more we practice. So, joy in the moment that we take up the practice. If you think back to whatever moment it was that you first encountered the Dhamma in this lifetime, maybe picking it back up from however far you've walked with it in a previous lifetime, who knows? Thinking back to that perfect mix of causes and conditions so that your heart would be open to it in that moment, so that you would encounter whatever book or podcast or video or teacher or group, friend, whatever moment that it was that first sparked a love for the Dhamma in this lifetime. And just reflecting on the joy in that moment, the joy in maybe even something beyond your conventional thinking mind, but the knowing that there is less and less suffering in this path and more happiness. And eventually, if we walk it long and deep and sincerely enough, there is the end of suffering. There's the highest happiness for any single one of us. I don't know about you, but those reflections make my heart bloom with joy. Joy that the Buddha had walked the path to its finish. And then, right when he was about to retreat into a cave for the rest of his lifetime, Brahma Sahampati came to him with hands in Anjali and asked him to please teach us. And all of his disciples who awakened after him, and all his disciples since that day to now who have awakened after him and carry on the teachings for our benefit. I don't know about you, but those thoughts make my heart bloom with joy. And I'm very surprised that I have not cried more often while giving Dhamma talks because I'm a very easy crier in day-to-day life. But when I recall those reflections in the times that I've done it on these recordings and in these meetings, that is when my eyes wet with tears. All the ways that since picking up the practice, we have become more good, more wise, more loving and kind. The ways that we responded in stressful situations with more and more calm, more and more equanimity, doing less and less harm to ourselves and all the people around us. And that goodness rippling into the world far beyond what we can see with our conventional thinking minds. I don't know about you, but these reflections make my heart bloom with joy. So joy as the practice builds, and then joy in the peaks, the high points of practice. And for a lot of people, that's, after going on one of their first meditation retreats, or when they meet a teacher that they really have a lot of great chemistry with, who, when wisdom passes from the teacher to the practitioner, is just frictionless, buttery smooth. And I love recollecting these peak moments and not just recollecting what insight I learned in those moments, even though that does help a lot, but even just remembering that these peak moments are possible and that as long as we keep walking the path with sincere dedication, these moments will happen again and again. And one thing I love about meeting in groups like these are that even if we're not experiencing a peak moment for ourselves that day, that morning, coming here and hearing about other people's good practice, I can borrow also their peak moments for myself. And there have definitely been moments in these sessions when the most impactful insight that I heard that morning was not from the person sitting on the high seat, but from somebody else who just shared what they were going through that day or what they had gone through that week. I think the more we practice, the more our ears attune to the clang of wisdom, no matter who it comes from. So for me, I feel that clang of wisdom so easily when I listen to Ajahn Sumedho, Ayya Santusaka, many of the people in this group. And also, I hear that clang of wisdom from sometimes from people who you would not expect. But even if someone does not have a very long, deep practice themselves, sometimes they just say something that hits at the exact right moment. And even that is wisdom. And I think that is a sign that our practice is deepening too, is even when it's not coming from a brand name practitioner, we can still detect that sound, that resonant gut punch of Dhamma. Sometimes the devas speak through other people, so let's not miss it either. And the devas are borrowing someone who does not appear to be a brand name practitioner. I'll give you an example of this. I love my examples. One time I was talking with a teacher who is a really great practitioner, someone who's really well regarded and well trusted. And he was expressing to me some frustration and concern that even though he had changed his view about something, his followers had still clung on to the outdated version of this view. And what arose in me in that conversation was actually to recall when I was in college. I went to this school that had a really thriving Greek Panhellenic fraternity life. And I don't know what your perception of fraternity sorority life is, but in my perception, they're not exactly known for being centers of deep, sincere, dedicated wisdom and practice. But I remember when I was a freshman at college and I was talking to someone who was like deep into that life. And she was telling me how actually the reputations of all of these sorority and fraternity houses are all like 5-ish years old. So whatever house is reputed to be the most fun house or the most smartest house with all the smartest members or the most fun or most beautiful members, whatever, that was actually true maybe about 5 years ago. And it's just that the perception and the public opinion takes a few years to catch up. And that really hit me. I felt the clang of wisdom when I heard that. And it really stuck with me. All these years later, I was in that conversation with a highly reputed teacher. And I brought up that story of the fraternity and sorority life at that college I went to. And it was heard and it seemed to help. So even when the source is unlikely, can we attune to the wisdom that's being expressed? And then even from those unlikely situations and unlikely teachers, we can have peak moments, peak insights. We can learn all the time. We can awaken and practice all the time. And I think the more we practice, the more we attune and incline our hearts toward goodness, just pure, simple goodness. I feel like, okay, in life, I feel like there are many or multiple ways of attuning the heart. And what do we train the heart to see as our North Star? So sometimes a lot of people in this world, they attune the heart toward worldly pleasure. And I feel like there were times in my life when I was also very interested in worldly pleasure. And then it takes a lot to have the heart get what it wants. So it takes like a really fancy, expensive meal or a fancy, expensive vacation or like people getting married, like the happiest day of their lives, people getting engaged. So like these big special moments and days that take a lot of planning, a lot of time and energy and money. But then there's this other way of attuning the heart toward just plain simple goodness. And then we can have those peak moments so often, every few days even, if if we teach our heart to rejoice at goodness. And one of these examples I'll give is at the end of my first residential retreat. And especially those first few are so especially potent and world changing, I think, life changing, because there's like life before going on a many day residential retreat where it's all silent. And then in the first few times, you really, or at least I really, had my eyes open to what depth of stillness and quiet was possible. Anyway, at the end of my first residential retreat, my yogi job was to be a dishwasher. And I remember being actually kind of grumpy that I couldn't just be silent, pure silent the whole time. And I kind of took over my shift and I was like telling people what to do because they were very confused. I was grumpy during the retreat, but then on the last day when Noble Silence lifted, the two people who I shared my shift with both thanked me so sincerely for just helping them know what to do during that shift because they wanted to be useful. They even expressed to me that in their day-to-day lives, post-retirement, living very, very quiet lives, like they actually didn't get to experience that degree of contributing to a task like that very much, and that they so cherished it and they were so grateful. And in the moment, I just said thank you. And then I excused myself, found a quiet place, and just cried from joy, cried from loving kindness. And I think the more and more I've trained my heart to attune to just goodness and loving kindness and wisdom, then more and more there are occasions where I have to just lie down from overwhelm, from so much joy. The joy of good practice in myself and the joy of witnessing good practice in others. I love hearing about when people forgive each other. I love hearing about when people are so brave, because practice requires us to be so brave. The if we really want to awaken, we really have to go where we've never gone before. And that moment when somebody takes a leap and goes further in their morality or their renunciation or any of the paramis, they go further than they've ever gone before. Oh my gosh, that is an occasion for joy. Even just talking about it, my whole body is like, when people are just good to each other. And then there are reasons to celebrate so often in life. We don't have to plan a big fancy vacation to be happy. We can just see goodness in ourselves and all the people around us. And then even joy during the lulls of practice. And I think there are two kinds of lulls. I think there are lulls where people have to step back from formal practice because daily conventional life calls them to implement the things that they learned during formal practice. So I have this friend who I have semi-monthly Dhamma calls with, and we just get on FaceTime and we talk about practice. And she was saying to me recently, like, oh my gosh, I just have so much happening in life, so much turbulence on so many levels, personally, professionally, romantically, even locationally, like a lot of moving around the country and the world. And she was expressing just a lot of concern and doubt about losing touch with formal practice. And then I reminded her that, those formal practice settings are so important and so great, and we all benefit from them so much. But right now, your formal practice is outside of groups and outside of classes, and your life right now is your class. And even her posture and her tone of voice shifted a little bit when she just said, you know, everything kind of changes when we look at it that way. So there's the lulls where even though we have to step back from formal practice, it's only because we have to implement everything that we've been talking about. It's like these Saturday morning sessions or whatever groups we go to, like these are the pit stops. And I don't actually know anything about NASCAR or racing, but I imagine those times when we have to go out and implement the things we've been talking about, that's when the car is racing around the course. And then there are the times when, even when we are engaging in formal practice, the lull is just feeling a kind of dryness about practice. And even if we're going through the motions, even if we're sitting on the cushion every day, there's this feeling of like treading water. And that's okay. I have never met a deep practitioner who has gone through all of the path or whatever path they've walked and not experienced that, which is a way of saying that I think everybody experiences that. And I think it only depends how straightforward people are about whether or not they experience it. That occasional dryness in practice. And of course, sometimes it helps to kind of like switch up something in practice to see if that brings inspiration back. Like maybe listening to a different teacher or just experimenting with the variables of what practice looks like. And sometimes even when we experiment, even if we try our best, it still feels dry. And I remember going through those periods and just knowing that it was going to be like this for a while, but also I heard Ayase Tusuka say this one time, and it was such a balm to me in those times was, sometimes we just have to wait around for the next miracle to happen. So I remember going through those dry spells in practice and just knowing I'm just sitting around waiting for the next miracle to happen. And even that gave me a sense of joy. Because those miracles do happen, like we keep walking the path with sincerity and dedication. Even if we, stray a little bit for a while, if you keep coming back, keep walking it, then yeah, those miracles do happen. And then joy during the low points, the lowest valleys of life. And when I think back to the times in my adult life when I was going through the most painful experiences, now I only think of them with gratitude and joy. Hmm. Like I've spoken about this before. Like there was one summer when Kyle and I were just engaging with conflict nonstop. And at the time, it was so difficult and it was depleting on a physical, emotional, mental, everything level. But looking back now, I can see how we were dismantling our lifelong conditioning of how to respond during conflict and reteaching ourselves how to do it in a way that was loving and attuned and kind and rooted in wisdom, not reactivity. And I'm grateful. I'm so grateful for that time. And, when we went through pregnancy loss, it was so hard in that moment because that's what I wanted the most in that chapter of life. But I walked away with so much of a clear understanding. And the insight that I have described before was that with every life, there is death. They are inseparable. Anything that was born is already dead. But I think I would like to share more about how much there was joy in the few days afterward, and how joy was the medicine and the antidote that I needed. Because, sometimes I think that I get the sense, and I don't know if this is true or not, but I think sometimes people think that if we are practicing well, then we must be practicing very seriously. And sometimes what we actually need is joy. So in the few days after going through that pregnancy loss, and I was really hurt by the way that some of my family members and my closest friends treated me in the few days after. I think they were just so scared or like they didn't know themselves how to hold someone through grief. So there was some clumsiness that resulted in really hurting my heart at the time. But despite all of my mother's most beautiful intentions, I don't think she really knew how to be with me in that extreme grief. And so she had said some things that really just cut into my heart. And I remember in the couple days after, and I actually was looking through my journals recently, so this is like fresh in my mind, what happened. But I remember the couple days after it happened, I found myself sitting there and thinking, I really wish that my mom knew how to just be with me. And I wish, like, if she really knew what I needed, she would just like spoil me and pamper me for a little bit. And that's what I really need, like that loving, gentle, soft compassion that I know my mother is fully capable of, just not in that moment. And then when I found myself thinking this, I thought, well, I don't really feel safe to be around my mother right now, but everything that I wish she would give me, I can actually give myself. So I called in sick. I used a sick day the following day, and whatever it was like, then I became my own loving parent to treat the part of my heart that was so wounded. And whatever I wanted, I gave myself. I took myself on a date to a Korean spa and soaked all morning. I took myself on a date after that to a really nice vegan restaurant in Palo Alto. I treated myself to whatever sounded fun on the menu, got an appetizer, an entree, and a fancy lemonade. And just all the while, like whatever I wanted, whatever would make me happy, whatever would bring a little bit of delight and joy into my heart, I said yes to. And I felt like when I was going through that episode of grief, I felt like it was this like raging inferno that tore through a forest. And even it was like the moments when I was wailing like a felled moose into Kyle's shoulder, that was like when the inferno was the strongest and the hottest. But then when I had that insight of with every life there is a death and they're completely intertwined and inseparable, then that fire cooled, but then I was left with this barren, charred forest, which was better than the painful, racking heat of the inferno, but still not very pleasant. So I feel like by going out and showering myself with compassion and really cultivating that sense of delight and joy again, that was when like the first few buds of new seeds breaking through the soil were starting to emerge. So joy as the antidote. And then just because like so many friends and so many family members had really caused harm through that whole episode, even though I still felt really comfortable and safe with Kyle, I had this like wariness around people outside of our family unit. And the way that joy helped me through that was I felt like I was so hurt by the people who are closest to me. So just on instinct, I left the house one day and I was really holding in my heart, like, what medicine do I need for this fear of these loved ones besides Kyle and my dog Jesso? And then as I was walking around the neighborhood reflecting on this, I was stopped by a random neighbor who lived on the street, whose name I knew, who I had chatted with a little bit, but was not by any means close to me. And as we just talked about nothing important at all, I noticed that there was this energetically, I could feel this sense of healing in my heart because I was afraid of the gestures of loving kindness. In that moment, I was afraid of loving kindness from my close friends and close family, but it was the loving kindness with a stranger that just reminded me that people are good. And even if they make mistakes, even if they do cause harm, there is so much goodness in people. And that little flicker, that spark of loving kindness with that stranger opened my heart again, gradually, to my friends and my family. That little spark of joy. I think that a lot of people have this like Buddhist meditation fantasy, like capital B, capital M, capital F fantasy. And then maybe after Buddhist meditation fantasy, there's like this little TM trademark symbol that I can hear practically when people talk about it. And it's this fantasy of like, oh, if I give up everything, my home, my family, if I retreat into a cave for many years, like Ajahn Mun did, then that is good practice. Then I will be a good practitioner. Then I will become fully enlightened. And I think for some people there is some truth to that. Like when I hear Ajahn Sumedho talk about the 3 months he spent just letting out all the rage he had accumulated since his childhood, and by feeling it, releasing it, and then one day just breaking through to a sense of bliss. Like that does sound like, okay, the Buddhist meditation fantasy worked for him that time. But then, he talks about another time when he went on a Buddhist meditation fantasy, and he spent a prolonged period of time in some remote meditation hut, and he was just racked with discomfort the whole time. Couldn't eat the food, too spicy, had incredible aversion to this other monk who was there, and just had a horrible time. And how he came away from that experience just knowing that, it's not necessary. It's not necessary to have that to awaken. And I hear this too of sometimes other people who go on really long retreats, like 3 months, 6 months, 1 year. I know people go on several year retreats sometimes. And sometimes the biggest insight they walk away with is maybe that wasn't necessary, actually. And I'm thinking of this because all the joys, all the sorrows, yes, we spend so much time in practice circles talking about facing suffering. And yes, all the suffering helps us learn how to face down the suffering. And also all the joys, all the friction of everyday life. All of that can be exactly the medicine we need to walk the path all the way to its finish. And I'm really thinking about one of the meditations I had, one of the retreats I went on, the last one where I went on as a retreatant. I dropped into deep meditation rather quickly and then stayed in really, really deep meditation for most of the retreat. And I remember thinking that actually, after a few days of really, really deep meditation, that it felt like I had hit the bottom of the barrel and I could not go any further in practice just sitting in jhana all day. And that if I wanted, and it was nice and all, it was very pleasant, but if I wanted to go deeper in practice, I would have to go back into everyday life and just jump into that rock tumbler of all the joys and all the sorrows, all the suffering. And that was the medicine that I needed. That was the path for me to go all the way. So, joy as the point also. Like, we're practicing for a higher and higher happiness, aren't we? We're practicing for the highest happiness. And I think we can go, every single one of us, I think we can go all the way. So, may we practice well. And if you have any comments, any questions, I would love to hear. You can go ahead and just speak. You don't have to wait to be called on.
Yeah. Thank you, Grace, for this joy talk. Your talk also remind me some experience I just had a couple of days ago, and in the airport, area, I met a Theravada tradition monk, and I was surprised. He's a Chinese because I thought he's Thai. And he told me he's coming back to China to do the like 6 months Tudong like practice. I was very surprised. I've never seen a monk, Theravada monk in China. I was so full of joy. And he told me it was actually not easy. I can imagine. But he told me there were so many good people. And he said people didn't notice, especially in the northern part of China, and people never seen Theravada tradition monk. And he said he could just stand in front of those restaurant, and people afraid of him first, and gradually they would approach him. When they notice he's not asking for the money, they would give him food, um, and then even the police. And in the end, they would not report him to the government. He told me, and people have so much goodness in their own heart. And I was just having this feeling, like you said, my body was such warm. I was full of the joy. I said, "You are the hope for China." And yeah, and so I feel when the heart is open, a lot of hidden goodness is revealed. Yeah, that joy from that Tatanka monk was such an amazing experience. Yeah.
Yay! The Ayahs call this my Deva clap. Thank you so much for Lee for sharing. And actually, my favorite part of what you said, and the part that brought tears to my eyes, was when you said what you said to the monk when you said, "You are the hope for China." And like the sincerity and the sweetness that I heard in your voice. Thank you.
This week the topic was joy, and I talked so much about joy, and also this past weekend experienced so much joy in reflecting that it's been 1 full year since giving my first formal Dhamma talk, that I figured I might share some more joy with you. So a month and a half ago, 2 months ago, I went to Cloud Mountain Retreat Center with the Ayahs and helped lead a retreat that was called 9 Days of Joy. And there was joy upon joy upon joy there. And so much joy, in fact, that I came home and shortly after the retreat wrote this little comic about that experience. And it's called 9 Days of Joy. And I thought it would be lovely to read this and share this with all of you. And I'm going to roll over to one side so that I can also put the images of the comic here so you can see them better. All right, so it's 9 Days of Joy. In June 2026, I helped lead a residential meditation retreat for the first time with Ayya Santutsika and Ayya Chitananda. The theme was 9 Days of Joy, an exploration of spiritual pleasures from entering the sanctuary all the way through crossing the finish line of Nibbana. This comic captures some highlights from the experience. The Ayahs picked me up from my home in Sacramento so we could road trip together from California to Cloud Mountain Retreat Center in Washington State. And the picture is all of us greeting each other very excitedly, and we all said, "I missed you." It was so nice to see each other again. And we're giggling here, like, haha, hee hee, hoo hoo. After a few hours, the car fell quiet. I put on my eye mask to rest. Suddenly, I felt a pressure on my third eye. Then I saw a vision of many devas, heavenly beings, hurrying to convene at the retreat center. and they're all rushing, pointing and hurrying to get there, and one of them is saying, "Come on, let's go to Cloud Mountain." And as a footnote, they do not look like cartoon stars in reality, but they are impossible to capture in a drawing. And then I wake up from my nap and I put up my eye mask onto my forehead and I say, "The Devas are gathering at Cloud Mountain." The Ayas were not surprised to hear this. When we arrived, the Ayas showed me to my private cottage. And there was a really comfortable bed there for taking naps every day. There was a nice desk for writing notes to answer yogis' questions. I got a lot of notes about what I was talking about or requests for resources so that people could learn more after the retreat. There was an in-unit bathroom and shower, a cozy couch where I did most of my meditating for hours every day, looking out the beautiful window at all the ferns and moss and bunnies and deer. There was a kitchenette with a really sweet welcome gift basket. After staying in much sparser dorms for all my previous retreats, this teacher's cottage was really a huge treat. I got to know the lay of the land. So there was my hidey hole, the teacher's cottage, where I spent all my free time meditating. And then there was a meditation hall where we gathered for group offerings. There was a founder's cottage where I ate breakfast with the Ayas each morning. There were a couple koi ponds, which were so beautiful, and a dining hall where there was a lot of delicious food. Then it was time for the evening Dhamma talk. A retreatant volunteered to chant the formal request. The melody was so sweet, so sincere, it made me weep with gladness. And I think she will not mind if I say who it is. This is Paula with her hands in Anjali, and she's chanting here so beautifully. Brahma Chaloka Dipati Sahampati. Soon we all found our daily rhythm of Dhamma talks, Q&As, Qigong, and self-guided meditation periods. Every single day I saw people make remarkable progress on the path. And people are saying all kinds of things here, like, "I'm learning to trust my body," or, "Whoa, life force energy is real." I keep feeling huge waves of bliss. The mind, the body, all of conventional reality, it's all just packaging. I realized I've been clinging to my suffering, and finally I let it go. Every breakthrough was a miracle. And speaking of miracles, there was one morning when Aya Santuska gave a particularly powerful Dhamma talk. In my field of vision, every surface started pulsing with bright colors. Even the blank walls glowed neon. And here I have stars in my eyes, and I'm saying, "Oh my God." Suddenly my perspective shifted, so I was gazing down at Aya Santuska from a staggering height. She was so far away that she looked as small as a green pea. Between us were uncountable devas watching from every level of heaven, all of them cheering. And they're cheering like, "Yes, sadhu, anumodami, woo!" As the retreat approached its conclusion, people expressed such heartfelt appreciation. Some yogis told me how their lives had been changed. "Can I talk to you for a second?" Some wrote long, detailed thank you letters. Some people stood to one side and bowed as I walked by. On the last full day of retreat, someone left me this note. And the note says, "Grace." This is a paraphrasing, but it says, "Grace, if the sky is clear today, when the dinner bell rings, go to the koi pond and look to the water lily leaves in the center." And I was used to getting notes with questions about the subject matter or requests for resources. So my initial response when I read this note was, "What the heck? Is this from Gandalf?" And of course, I had to follow the clues to the scavenger hunt. This is what I found. The sunlight peeked through the forest canopy and touched the water at the perfect angle, so it reflected the pond's ripples onto the lily plants. The leaves glittered like golden disco balls. I stood there a while with a yogi who had invited me, moved by the beauty before us, but even more so touched by his generosity for sharing this moment with me. Then came the final morning of the retreat. We packed up our stuff and had one last breakfast together and one last tender moment. And the two characters here are saying, I'm so grateful for you. And I'm so grateful for you too. Words will never fully express. Exactly. So we just stood there for a while, smiling at each other. 9 days of joy indeed. And then a list of the people who I held in my heart as I drew this comic. Thanks for reading along.